But you got to tell me, are you ready yet? Because I've been ready. And here's what I'm ready to do. Nothing violent at all. We need to stop going to work. Every single person. And I don't care how many comments you write in the comment section about, well, I have to feed my family or I have bills to pay. Guess what? So does everybody fucking else, including me. But we have the power as the people to sit our asses at home for a day, 2 days, 3 days, and let the economy tank. Yeah, that's bad for us. But you know who it's really bad for? This government and all the billionaires that are secretly behind them. Well, I guess it's not really a secret. You need to get mad. I'm mad. I'm angry today. And the reason I'm angry is for a multitude of reasons. Number one, Donald Trump stood on a stage today and implied that domestic violence is not a crime. They are taking people and continuing to throw them in vans. People are standing on the streets in peaceful protest with their right to assemble and getting knocked over by cops and ICE agents and whoever the hell else. Go watch my last video. I have a whole compilation. They stopped children on a plane, on a runway, who they were going to deport, children who had already suffered abuse and neglect and all kinds of trauma. They can now just profile people. If I'm in Florida and I decide that I'm going to speak to people I know in Spanish, which I can do decently, does that mean I get profiled as well and put in a van, or am I off the hook because I'm white? You guys mad yet? Because the minute we stop going to work, we get the power back. And again, I don't care. You can say a million times in my comments, well, I have stuff to pay for. Guess what? Get uncomfortable, because it's about to be real uncomfortable for all of us.
So I guess it does exist. House Democrats on the Oversight Committee just released this one page from Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday book from what appears to be then Jeffrey Epstein's friend, Donald J. Trump. Now, you remember the Wall Street Journal reported that this page existed in that book, all the way down to the details of this sort of crude outline of a woman's body with this imaginary conversation between Trump and Epstein, which ends with the words, "May every day be another wonderful secret." And it is signed, Donald. The Wall Street Journal reported the exact language included, the exact drawing, and the signature that appears very similar to the president's signature. Immediately after the Wall Street Journal report was released back in July, President Trump sued the journal for $10 billion over their reporting that this page was included in Epstein's birthday book. Trump's lawsuit says the journal and its owner, Rupert Murdoch, were lying about the existence of that page and that the reporting defamed Trump and caused him to suffer overwhelming financial and reputational harm. At the time, Trump even posted to his social media page saying, "We have just filed a powerhouse lawsuit against everyone involved in publishing the false, malicious, defamatory, fake news article in the useless rag that is the Wall Street Journal. The lawsuit is filed not only on behalf of your favorite president, me, but also in order to continue standing up for all Americans who will no longer tolerate the abusive wrongdoings of the fake news media." The House Oversight Committee subpoenaed the Epstein estate for documents, including this book, and today the estate handed things over. So that's why we're hearing about it today. Clearly, the book and this page do exist, exactly as the journal reported. Now, it's possible that Trump himself did not sign this page, and maybe someone on his staff signed it on his behalf, but it does say Donald Trump, so that's not fake news. Whether Trump's lawsuit will hold up in court, we will just have to wait and see. Now, this is just the beginning. I am sure we are going to see more pages from that book, including from another famous face the journal reported on. President Bill Clinton also allegedly submitted a birthday note to Epstein. The Oversight Committee also requested other financial documents from the Epstein estate that may help lawmakers follow the money to see how Epstein was financially able to support this criminal enterprise for so many years.
Old MacDonald destroyed farms. I told you so. I'm really struggling with this shit right now. I really am. A couple of weeks back, I made a video about the Texas flood victims, and despite so many people saying that they deserve this because Texas is a pro-Trump state, I talked about we need to have empathy and compassion because it's a natural disaster. No one deserves to live and be a victim of natural disasters. But what is happening to these farmers right now is not a natural disaster. That is a man-made disaster. You voted for this. And I am struggling so hard. I have searched my bag. I have searched my pockets. I've looked between my fucking couch cushions to find a fuck to give. And I am coming up short. An overwhelming majority of these farmers voted for Donald Trump. And what kills me is that you guys aren't stupid, right? I've seen some of these interviews, 50% of soybeans divided by 9%, and I'm getting a 6%. Like, you guys are smart. Like, I was watching some of the shit you guys were saying, and I was like, damn. But somehow you couldn't figure out the mathematics and the logistics of the harm a Trump presidency was going to cause. A man whose entire platform was promising to cause harm to so many other communities that you said, yep, that's my guy. Because you thought the billionaire gave a fuck about farmers. Trust me, I understand the importance of farmers and the farming industry, which is why I voted the way I did. I cared about you guys. And now you're coming out here crying and asking for empathy and compassion and a bailout. Ask Elon. Elon's on his way to become a trillionaire. A trillionaire. After wreaking havoc in the White House, going through our personal information, our funding, cutting for everybody. Get some of those Doge savings to bail you out, if there ever was any, right? You voted for a man that promised to do harm to everybody else, and you thought that harm wasn't going to come knocking on your door. And now I'm the dick. I'm the asshole because I'm struggling to give a shit. We are 50%, almost 50% complete with Project 2025, which means there's 50% to go. And now I'm the asshole. Trust me, I feel like an asshole. I am not this person. That's what gets me so upset too. You know, not only because you guys fucking voted the way you did, but you have turned me into this person. Because how can I not be? Right? My heart feels one way, but what my eyes are seeing has me not listening to my heart. And I will never forgive you fucking people for that. The problem is we should all care, right? We should all care about what's happening to these farmers. But because of this presidency, so many people are fighting to protect themselves, fighting against what's happening to them, that not only can they not find the empathy and compassion for these farmers, but it's every man for himself. And students were begging for a bailout just for going to college and being victims of predatory interest rates. You tell them to go pick themselves up by their bootstraps and get a real job. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, social workers, engineers, like farmers, we all contribute to the society and deserve a break. But no, that's socialism. But the problem is me saying this, right? Me saying this is going to have you double down, right? Because you're going to want to spite me now. Because I'm such a horrible person for struggling to find empathy and compassion for you. I'm only human. I'm not perfect. I never claimed to be.
Well, we've got some breaking news here. Donald Trump loses in court again. This time in his effort to have an appeals court throw out the judgment in the E. Jean Carroll case. Let me read a little of this for you. A federal appeals court on Monday rejected President Donald Trump's bid to overturn a jury verdict ordering him to pay $83.3 million for defaming writer E. Jean Carroll. Now, you'll remember this lawsuit had to do with the fact that E. Jean Carroll came out and said that Donald Trump had raped her in a department store in the 1990s. Of course, Trump then denied it, called her a liar, called her a bunch of other horrible things, and defamed her. So E. Jean Carroll said, well, I'm not putting up with this shit. I'm suing your fat orange ass. And she won. Not once, but twice. And he was ordered to pay $83.3 million in just one of those cases. Let me continue reading here. The decision from a trio of judges on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit upheld that verdict, which Trump argued was both excessive and invalid following a Supreme Court decision that expanded his presidential immunity. You know, Trump's lawyers must be morons if they argued that recent Supreme Court decision was going to help Trump in this case. That had to do with immunity from criminal prosecution. This is a civil lawsuit. It's not relevant. Anyway, both cases accused Trump of defaming Carol in statements denying her accusation that he raped her in the mid-1990s in the Manhattan department store of Bergdorf Goodman. Well, I'd like to congratulate the American people once again for electing a man to be president of the United States after these judgments had already been entered. At the time of the election, E. Jean Carroll had already been successful and got a judgment against Donald Trump where a jury determined that Donald Trump had sexually abused her and then defamed her. And the American people reelected that guy. Way to go, morons.
Sometimes I just got to read things from Politico. Here's the headline. Quote, "I'm going to punch you in your fucking face. Scott Bessent threatens an administration rival." Bessent, whatever. A private dinner attended by dozens of administration officials and close advisors to President Donald Trump was temporarily marred by a dramatic clash between two of Trump's top economic officials, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at one point threatening to punch top housing finance official Bill Pulte in the fucking face, quote unquote. The Wednesday evening event was supposed to be one of celebration. It was both the much anticipated inaugural dinner at Executive Branch, the ultra-exclusive Georgetown club created by and for Trump's world's uber-rich, and a birthday party for MAGA-friendly podcaster Chamath Palihapitiya. The long table for the 30-some guests was set up with top-of-the-line crystal and china. We paid for all this, by the way. We paid for all this. The guest list included Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, SBA Administrator Kelly Loeffler, Medicare and Medicaid Chief Mehmet Dr. Oz, plus venture capitalist David Sachs, Palihapitiya's partner on the All In podcast. But amid the cocktail hour din, Bessent lashed out at Pulte in an expletive-laden diatribe. The Treasury Secretary had heard from several people that the Federal Housing Finance Agency director had been bad-mouthing him to Trump. A person close to him said he wasn't about to engage in chit-chat as if nothing was amiss. "Why the fuck are you talking to the president about me? Fuck you," Bessent told Pulte. "I'm going to punch you in your fucking face." These people are in charge of your wallet and my wallet. The scene was described to me by one eyewitness and 4 other people familiar with what happened. The only fact they disagreed on was whether it was Bessent or Pulte who initiated the conversation. They and others who described the conflict were granted anonymity due to the sensitivity of the situation. Pulte appeared stunned, and the tense encounter prompted club co-owner and financier Omid Malik to intervene, according to the 3 people. But Bessent wasn't having it. He sought to get him kicked out, the eyewitness said. "It's either me or him," Bessent said to Malik. "You tell me who's getting the fuck out of here. How about all of you? How about the entire Republican Party?" Or he added, "We could go outside." "To do what?" asked Pulte. "To talk?" "No," Bessent replied. "I'm going to fucking beat your ass." Seeking to de-escalate the situation, Malik separated the men, walking Bessent to another part of the club to calm down. During the seated dinner, Bessent and Pulte were placed on opposite ends of the table, and the party went off without further episode. Bessent, Pulte, Malik, and the White House declined to comment. Come on, where's Trump's press secretary when you need her? The confrontation, which one Trump insider called bonkers and another called unhinged, underscores the surprising tensions between top Trump officials tasked with working on the nation's most sensitive economic matters. Okay, I'm just saying that when everybody's fighting to kneel down in front of Donald Trump and make him happy, think South Park. they're going to like push each other. They're going to get mad. They're going to have Band-Aids all around their lips and everything like that, chapped lips and you name it. They're just in a bad mood. They want to get on their knees before the next guy. And when they're down on their knees, they don't want to know that the other guy down on his knees is saying something bad about him when he's trying to make Donald Trump happy. And I know you're thinking that's completely inappropriate for me to say, but this is what a fucking clown show this is.
Under what conditions can a federal agent stop you and ask you for evidence that you are in this country legally? Well, the Supreme Court just responded to a government request for a stay in Nome v. Perdomo, which asked exactly that question. So let's unpack this for a second. The lower court issued an injunction that stopped the federal government from asking people whether or not they were here legally just because they heard them speaking Spanish in Southern California or saw them clustering near places like a Home Depot. The Supreme Court today issued a stay in that case, which is not a final decision. It's not a decision on the merits. It hasn't been argued yet. This was a very short decision that says, for now, that decision is on pause until it gets argued further. And most of the majority in the decision did not give us any explanation as to why, but Justice Kavanaugh did give us an opinion as to why he voted yes. That means that this opinion does not speak for the entire court. It only speaks for him, but it does give us some insight into how he would possibly vote if this came back up, but it doesn't necessarily tell us because he might change his mind if he heard a better argument. So under the Fourth Amendment, before a police officer can stop you, search you, that sort of thing, they have to meet certain evidentiary standards. There has to be some sort of evidence that you're doing something wrong. Well, according to the case law cited by Justice Kavanaugh, to stop an individual for brief questioning about their immigration status, the government must have what's called a reasonable suspicion that the individual is illegally present in the United States. A reasonable suspicion. So what does that mean? Well, according to this case, reasonable suspicion is less than probable cause and considerably short of preponderance of the evidence. Okay, what does that mean? Well, you've heard of beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a really high standard for a crime. Before you can be convicted of a crime, you have to be sure beyond a reasonable doubt. Very high. Preponderance of the evidence is 50%. I mean, you're at least 50% plus, a whisper more than 50%. This is less than even that. And then probable cause is even a little bit less than that. This is less than probable cause. Probable cause is what they have to search you for, weapons. Reasonable suspicion is a really, really low standard. It means that a suspicion would exist in any average reasonable person. And Justice Kavanaugh says that because there's a higher level and higher percentage of illegal immigrants in the Los Angeles area, and because they tend to gather in areas where they can find work, and that work tends to be jobs where they won't need some sort of required paperwork to prove that they are citizens, those would tend to be places like, say, a Home Depot, or as he says, places like day labor, landscaping, agriculture, or construction. He also says that because it's so close to the Mexican border, they're more likely to speak Spanish as a first language and not speak English. So between these four things, it is, he says, reasonable for your average person to see a group of people speaking Spanish by a Home Depot in Southern California and have a suspicion that they may not be here legally. He points out that, he says, to be clear, apparent ethnicity alone cannot furnish reasonable suspicion. However, it can be a factor. But according to Justice Kavanaugh, without hearing this case argued any further, this is not a substantive decision. This is enough to at least briefly consider that this might be enough for reasonable suspicion and therefore enough to institute a stay by his understanding of the law. Now, according to his set of factors, this should really only apply in Southern California or somewhere along the border with Mexico. And how exactly you separate apparent ethnicity alone from these other factors, I'm not entirely sure. He also states that having a reasonable suspicion means only that immigration officers may briefly stop the individual and ask about their immigration status. However, what if they don't have a response or don't have evidence to the contrary? Does that mean that the officers can bring them in? Does this mean that by law everyone must travel with some sort of evidence everywhere they go? I don't know. He says only if the person is illegally in the United States may the stop lead to further immigration proceedings. But I'm not sure how logically that would work any other way. Again, though, this was not a definitive decision. All the government had to demonstrate was a fair prospect of success in this case. That's all they had to demonstrate, is that they had a chance that they might win. And they did in his mind, and so that's why he went this way. This is not a final decision. This is just him deciding whether or not to push pause. That's my best short read on this stay. Follow me for more about law and government.
Happy Monday morning, everybody. Do you remember a week ago how we all spent Labor Day weekend and it totally took over the internet? We were all wondering if Donald Trump was dead or dying. You remember that? Yeah. What if he had died? What if he had died? Jonathan V. Last at the Bulwark put out an article a week ago that I wanted to cover last week. Was one of his daily triad newsletters from last Tuesday, September 2nd, just titled "The Death of Trump." And he wrote that after we had spent the whole weekend, and it totally took over Twitter and TikTok, that Donald Trump was either dead or dying. There were street closures in Washington, D.C. They had shut down all the roads around Walter Reed Hospital, and speculation was going crazy. And so JVL did a newsletter like, okay, let's game this out. Let's game this out. What would happen? And this was the day that this newsletter came out last Tuesday, when it was announced that Donald Trump was going to do some announcement at 2 p.m., and it just ended up being a Space Force thing. And he analogizes a lot of this stuff to a movie that came out in 2017 called The Death of Stalin, which is a satirical comedy about a former leader in Russia that I haven't seen yet, but I'm going to watch it now after reading this newsletter. So he says, there are a few baseline scenarios that we can work from. 1, Trump leaves office peaceful in 2029 without having sought re-election and eventually just passes away. 2, Trump dies sometime between now and January 2028 before he has declared his intentions on running for re-election. 2A, Trump dies sometime after declaring his intentions on running for re-election, but before the election while still in office. So before this term runs out. 3, Trump runs for re-election in 2028 for a third term. He wins and is the sitting president in his third term when he dies at some point after January 2029. Or 3A, Trump runs for re-election in 2028, loses, then dies while out of office, but actively pursuing another return to power. I love JVL's imagination, dark as it usually is. There are other permutations, but the important underlying difference among these scenarios is that either Trump is holding power or he's merely making a claim on power when he dies. If Trump is the sitting president, whether he's in his second term or third term, the line of succession is clear. J.D. Vance or his vice president, if it's not J.D. Vance in the third term, becomes president. In the story of the death of Stalin, there's a guy named Gregory Malenkov who was Stalin's chief deputy. He assumed the premiership of the Soviet Union immediately following Stalin's death, but being handed that kind of an office of leadership is not the same as having control over a movement. Malenkov was a dullard, and Nikita Khrushchev outmaneuvered him over the next 2 years and eventually took power. And that was, I think, in the late 40s, early 50s, somewhere around there. And then it was Khrushchev who, gave us the Cuban Missile Crisis and things like that. If, just for the sake of argument, J.D. Vance was Trump's vice president when he passed on, I would not assume J.D. Vance to be anything more than a temporary leader of the Trumpist movement. That dude has Malenkov written all over him. So what would happen after Trump's vice president took power? There would be a lot of bowing and scraping as ambitious Trumpists pretended to get on board, but behind the scenes, they'd be maneuvering to dump Vance at the first available moment. Boy, ain't that the truth. Immediately following Trump's death, Vance will be desperate to win the public backing of the Trump children, especially Ivanka and Don Jr. For legitimacy purposes. Yeah. The question then is who would end up with control of the MAGA movement? It's possible that Vance might just by default, but maybe not. Everyone and their brother would take a shot. Kristi Noem, Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, Ted Cruz, Little Marco, maybe even Stephen Miller. The point is, either someone will consolidate power over MAGA or no one will. And it's even possible that this cult of personality just completely falls apart without Trump. I think that's the most likely scenario, but that's just my opinion. What if Trump is not president when he dies? That's bad news for J.D. Hillbilly, obviously, but good news for everyone else because they no longer have to take the movement away from someone else. They just have to inherit it. And JVL goes on to say that's a messier proposition in some ways, but ultimately it gets to the post-Trump equilibrium more quickly without the intermediary step of a Vance caretaker administration. And in this case, the dynastic solution is more easily achievable, meaning Trump's kids. If Trump dies in office, there will be pressure for Ivanka and Don Jr. to bless J.D. Vance as their father's successor. But what if it's January 28th and Trump has been openly toying with running for a third term when he dies? Now there's room for someone other than Vance to fulfill Trump's legacy. It's pretty obvious to the author that that person would be one of the Trump children. Yeah. Columnist Damon Linker observes that Trump is a particular kind of autocrat. He sits at the head of an ideological movement, but is himself not particularly ideological. Trump ran for president to stay out of prison and make money. That's Trump's ideology, period. Instead, he focused on looting and self-aggrandizement. Yeah, he discovered what the presidency is worth. Not millions of dollars, but billions of dollars. Trump's taken in something like $8 billion since becoming the president this term. It's insane. Why would the Trump family let go of that asset, that money-making goose that laid the golden egg? J.D. Vance's long game is clearly an attempt to convince stronger candidates like Tucker Carlson or Don Jr. to not succeed Trump. He will tell them that the job of president is too much work, that he can deliver everything these guys want for them while they live a life of leisure. But that only works if what the Trump children want is ideological and policy-based. What if the Trump children just want to keep making money? How would President Vance do that for them? The obvious answer is that he can't. Once the Trump family no longer controls the Republican Party, which gives it an even money chance to control U.S. government every 4 years, the money machine turns off. Does that sound like something a Trump would do? In the death of Stalin, Stalin's kids, Svetlana is a dilettante and Vasily is a drunk hidden from public view. In our time, Ivanka and her husband control a hedge fund. Laura Trump has a TV career. Don Jr. is a MAGA folk hero. And the family is working with a $5 billion crypto war chest. Why wouldn't they continue in the family business? And if they tried, who would or who could stop them? God. And there's the possibility that no one is able to consolidate power in MAGA. What happens then? Does the movement fall apart or morph into something else? And he invites discussion in the comments. As always, everybody knows I'm a big fan of the Bulwark. I disagree with the folks who are on the Bulwark almost daily on substantive issues, but when I consume their content, I always learn something. It always makes me think, and it always helps me refine my own arguments for things. And so I really encourage everybody to subscribe to the Bulwark and the Atlantic and Talking Points memos. Those are like my 3 go-tos. And you get JVL's daily newsletter if you subscribe to the Bulwark. And he writes a lot of pieces like that that just make you think about things in like actual real world terms. It's like, well, what if Trump does die? What happens after that? And he comes up with all those scenarios to go through. And it's beneficial to think about. And it's often amusing to ponder as well. So subscribe to the Bulwark. I'll see you guys soon. It's Monday. Have a great week.